the Sleepstory Channel, a place where true historical events gently guide you into peaceful slumber. Tonight, we invite you to relax and enjoy this epic tale of courage and determination, the Battle of Marathon. If you find our historical journey soothing, please remember to subscribe to our channel for more tales. Now, close your eyes and travel back to the 5th century before the Common Era, where the fate of Western civilization hangs in the balance. The shadow of the Great King. The year was 490 before the Common Era, and a shadow stretched westward across the Aegean Sea. It was the long reach of Darius I, the great king of Persia, whose vast empire had swallowed kingdoms and city-states from the Indus River to the shores of Ionia. The Persian Empire stood as a colossus astride the known world, its armies numberless as the stars, its wealth beyond measure. In his palace at Susa, King Darius sat upon his golden throne, his dark eyes fixed upon maps of lands yet unconquered. The autumn winds carried whispers of rebellion to his ears, tales of a small, fractious collection of city-states called Hellas, where men spoke of freedom and defiance. The memory of insult burned in the great king's mind. For years now, he had been forced to endure the knowledge that these Greeks had dared to challenge the might of Persia. It was a transgression that demanded punishment. In his private chambers, adorned with the spoils of conquered nations, Darius would often stand before a slave whose sole duty was to whisper into the royal ear 3 times each day, "Master, remember the Athenians." For it was Athens, more than any other Greek city, that had earned the great king's wrath. When his satraps had struggled to quell rebellion in Ionia across the Aegean, it was Athens that had sent ships and men to aid the rebels. Though the revolt had ultimately been crushed beneath Persian heels, the audacity of these Athenians lingered like an unhealed wound in the pride of Persia. The great king's court bustled with activity as preparations were made. Messengers raced across the empire, carrying royal commands. In the shipyards of Phoenicia, timber groaned and bent to the will of skilled shipwrights. In the barracks of 100 subject nations, warriors sharpened swords, strung bows, and prepared for war. The vast machine of Persian conquest was stirring once more. "Let them feel the weight of my displeasure," Darius proclaimed to his assembled generals and advisors, his voice echoing off the polished walls of his audience chamber. "Let them kneel before Persia, or be swept away by the tide of our armies. Athens will burn, and from its ashes, all of Greece will learn the price of defiance." Thus was set in motion the wheels of destiny that would carry 2 worlds toward collision on a small, unassuming plain near a village called Marathon. Sons of Athens. Dawn broke over the Acropolis, bathing the temples of Athens in golden light. The city was stirring to life, as it had for centuries, nestled between the mountains and the sea. In the agora, merchants arranged their wares, while citizens gathered to discuss matters of politics and philosophy. Children raced through narrow streets, their laughter mingling with the call calls of vendors and the distant bleating of sacrificial goats being led to the temple. Athens, in the year 490, stood at the crossroads of its destiny. A mere generation had passed since the overthrow of the tyrants, since the revolutionary ideas of Cleisthenes had given birth to a radical new form of government democracy. The city hummed with intellectual energy and civic pride. Here, every free man had a voice in the assembly. Here, power flowed not from the whims of a king, but from the collective decisions of its citizens. In a modest house near the slopes of the Acropolis lived Miltiades, son of Cimon. Though nearing 50 years of age, his frame remained strong, hardened by decades of military service. His face, weathered by sun and wind, bore the quiet dignity of experience and the subtle lines of a man who had known both triumph and despair. As he broke his morning bread, dipping it in olive oil pressed from his family's groves, Miltiades contemplated the uncertain future. Unlike many of his fellow Athenians, he knew the Persians intimately. Years ago, he had governed a colony in the Chersonese, a vassal to the Persian throne. He had served in the court of Darius, observed the mechanized precision of the Persian war machine, witnessed its terrible efficiency, and he had betrayed them, fleeing to Athens when the Ionian revolt collapsed. "Father, will there be war?" his son Cimon asked, a youth of 15 summers, his eyes bright with the mixture of fear and excitement that colors the thoughts of the young when they contemplate conflict. Miltiades studied his son's face for a moment before answering. "War has been coming for longer than you have drawn breath, my son. The only question is when the storm will break upon our shores." Across the city, in the workshop of a potter near the Dipylon Gate, another Athenian prepared for his day. Callimachus, the polemarch, or archon of Athens, examined a finished kylix, a drinking cup decorated with figures of heroes from ancient myths. Though his official duties centered on military leadership, Callimachus maintained his connection to the artisan's craft, finding in it both livelihood and solace. His fingers traced the painted outline of Heracles wrestling the Nemean lion. "We may all need such strength in the days to come," he murmured to himself as a messenger appeared at his threshold, breathing heavily from his run through the city streets. "Polemarch," the young man gasped, "the council summons you." "Ships have been sighted off Euboea, Persian ships. So it begins," thought Callimachus, setting aside the cup with care before reaching for his cloak. The craftsman would become the warrior once more. The envoys of the great king. The delegation arrived with the calculated pomp and ceremony typical of Persian diplomacy. 5 men, their robes richly embroidered with golden thread that caught the light of the Mediterranean sun, stood before the council of Athens. Their faces were impassive, trained in the rigid etiquette of the Persian court, yet their eyes betrayed a hint of disdain as they gazed upon the simple stone benches of Athenian democracy. The lead envoy, his beard oiled and curled in the Persian fashion, stepped forward. His Greek was fluent, though flavored with the accent of the East. "Hear the words of Darius, King of Kings, Lord of the 4 quarters of the world," ruler of nations, chosen of Ahura Mazda. The titles rolled from his tongue like thunder across distant hills. The great king extends his hand in mercy to the people of Athens. Submit now, and you shall prosper under his benevolent rule. A murmur rippled through the assembled Athenians. The envoy continued, unperturbed. From a small golden coffer carried by an attendant, he withdrew 2 symbolic items, a handful of earth and a small silver cup of water. Earth and water, he announced. These are what the king requires as tokens of your submission. Give them freely, and Athens will find favor in the eyes of Darius. Refuse, and Athens will be erased from memory, its land salted, its people scattered to the winds. Silence fell over the council chamber. The demand for earth and water was well understood, symbolic surrender of land and sea to Persian dominion. Other Greek cities had already complied, choosing the certainty of life under Persian rule over the risk of annihilation. Miltiades rose from his seat, his voice steady as he addressed his fellow citizens. I have lived among the Persians. I have seen the nature of their empire. Those who kneel before the great king may preserve their lives, but they forfeit their souls. They become subjects, not citizens. They exist at the pleasure of a distant monarch who views them as no more than entries in his tax ledgers. His gaze swept across the faces of the council members before settling on the Persian envoys. Athens has tasted freedom. We have built something here that has no place in the Persian worldview, a society where power resides not in the hands of one man, but in the hands of all citizens. This is what they truly fear. This is what they seek to extinguish. The debate raged through the day and into the evening. Some counseled prudence, pointing to the overwhelming might of Persia. Others stood firm with Miltiades, arguing that submission would mean the end of everything Athens had built. As darkness fell and oil lamps cast flickering shadows across the chamber walls, the Athenians reached their decision. Their response would echo through the centuries to come. The Persian envoys were escorted not to a place of honor, but to a deep pit at the edge of the city. There, with cold fury in their eyes, the Athenians gave them their answer. You want earth and water for your king? One of the archons asked. Then take all you desire. And with that, the envoys were cast into the pit. The envoys who had come expecting tokens of submission, instead finding only their deaths on Athenian soil, buried beneath Athenian earth. Athens had made its choice. There would be no submission, no surrender. The die was cast, and war was now inevitable. The storm gathers. Across the wine-dark sea, the harbors of Asia Minor teemed with activity. The great Persian armada assembled under the watchful eyes of daddies and Artaphorns, generals entrusted by Darius to bring Athens to heel. Hundreds of ships lined the shores, their decks crowded with warriors drawn from across the vast Persian Empire. Medes and Scythians with their brightly colored tunics and wicker shields. Saki archers from the steppes, feared for their deadly accuracy. Infantry from the mountainous regions of the empire, wielding short spears and carrying light shields of stretched hide. Among the preparations moved a figure, both familiar and foreign to the Persian ranks, Hippias, the aged former tyrant of Athens, exiled decades before, when democracy took root in his city. Now, in his 70s, his back bent by the weight of years and bitterness, Hippias served as advisor to the Persian commanders. His knowledge of Athenian politics and geography made him invaluable. His desire for vengeance made him zealous. "The city will be divided," Hippias assured daddies as they stood on a headland overlooking the gathered fleet. "Many still remember my rule with fondness. When they see the might of Persia at their gates and the rightful ruler returned, they will turn against the radical Democrats." Daddies, a seasoned commander who had crushed rebellions across the empire, nodded thoughtfully. "And the landing site you suggested, this marathon, it is suitable for our purposes." "Perfect," replied Hippias, a thin smile creasing his wrinkled face. "A wide plain for our cavalry to maneuver, yet close enough to Athens to strike fear into their hearts. My supporters in the city will rise up when they hear of our arrival." As the final preparations were made, an unusual occurrence drew the attention of the Persian commanders. As Hippias boarded his ship, he was overcome by a violent fit of coughing. When it subsided, the old man found himself holding a dislodged tooth, fallen from his aging gums. "An ill omen," whispered one of the Persian magi nearby, but Hippias waved away such superstitions. Yet, as the fleet prepared to depart, he could not help but notice that the tooth had fallen into the sand of the shore. With surprising sentimentality, he knelt and searched for it, his fingers combing through the coarse grains. Despite thorough efforts, the tooth could not be recovered, swallowed by the foreign soil. "Perhaps," he mused aloud, to no one in particular, "this is all that shall remain of me on Asian shores. The rest will return to Athenian soil, one way or another." Meanwhile, in Athens, the assembly had appointed 10 generals, one from each tribe, to lead the city's defense. Among them was Miltiades, whose experience with Persian warfare proved invaluable in the hurried preparations. The city buzzed like a disturbed beehive as men of military age checked their equipment and trained on the fields outside the walls. In his workshop, Callimachus the polemarch supervised the refurbishment of ancient armor drawn from temple treasuries. Bronze helmets were relined, shields repainted with tribal emblems, spear points sharpened to gleaming perfection. As the city's war archon, he would hold the highest military authority in the coming conflict. "How many hoplites can we field?" Miltiades asked him during a council of war held in the cool interior of the temple of Athena. 10,000 at most," replied Callimachus, his expression grave. "And we must leave some behind to guard the city walls." "Against the Persian multitude," another general muttered, "it seems like counting pebbles against the sands of the shore." Miltiades looked around at his fellow generals, men he would soon lead into battle. "We must seek allies. The Spartans are the finest warriors in all of Greece. With their spears beside ours, we might yet turn the Persian tide. Then we must send our swiftest runner," Callimachus declared. "The Persians could land any day. There is not a moment to lose. A runner's journey. The figure moved across the landscape with rhythmic determination, feet pounding the dusty road in a steady beat that had not faltered for hours. This was Phaedopides, herald of Athens and its most renowned runner, a man whose legs had carried messages across Greece for years. Never before had he borne a message of such grave importance. The journey from Athens to Sparta stretched nearly 140 miles through some of the most challenging terrain in Greece. Mountains rose and fell before him. Streams cut across his path. The unforgiving sun beat down upon his tanned skin. Yet Phaedopides ran on, his breathing controlled, his mind focused on the singular task of reaching Sparta with the desperate plea of Athens. As he crested a particularly steep hill, the afternoon sun casting his shadow long behind him, his thoughts turned to the gravity of his mission. The Persian fleet was sailing, perhaps at this very moment making landfall on Attic soil. The fate of his city, indeed, the fate of all free Greeks, might well rest upon the strength of his legs and the endurance of his heart. Night fell, but Phaedopides did not stop. Under the silver light of the moon, he continued his relentless pace, guided now by the stars and his intimate knowledge of the route. Wild animals prowled the darkness around him. He glimpsed the gleaming eyes of wolves among the trees and heard the distant cry of mountain lions. Yet fear of beasts paled beside the fear of failure. On the slopes of Mount Parthenion, as the first light of the second day began to break across the eastern horizon, a strange experience befell the exhausted runner. Before him on the path appeared a figure bathed in unnatural light, the god Pan, with his goat legs and horned head. Athenian, the god's voice echoed oddly in the dawn air. Why do your people neglect me? I have favored Athens many times in the past, and I shall do so again in your hour of need. But remember me in your victories. Before the astonished Phaedopides could respond, the apparition vanished, leaving only the scent of wild herbs and mountain dust. The runner stood frozen for a moment, wondering if exhaustion had conjured the vision. Regardless, he took it as a favorable omen and pressed on with renewed vigor. The sun rose and fell again. Phaedopides' legs burned with fatigue, his lungs labored, his lips cracked from thirst. Still, he ran. Villages and farms passed in a blur. Curious onlookers offered water, which he accepted gratefully, but without pausing longer than absolutely necessary. Finally, as the sun climbed toward its zenith on the second day, the walls of Sparta came into view. Summoning his last reserves of strength, Phaedopides quickened his pace, his heart pounding not just from exertion, but from the urgent need to deliver his message. He was led immediately to the assembly of Spartan elders, his legs trembling with fatigue as he stood before them. Dust covered his body. Dried sweat had left white trails of salt on his skin, and his voice was hoarse when he spoke. "Men of Sparta," he proclaimed, "the people of Athens implore you to come to their aid. The Persians have landed on Greek soil. help us defend not just our city, but the freedom of all Hellenes." The Spartan elders listened impassively, their faces betraying nothing of their thoughts. When Phaedopides finished, the chief elder rose to deliver their response. "Athens has our sympathy, and in time, our spears," he declared. "But we are in the midst of the sacred festival of Carnea. Our laws forbid us to march to war until the full moon has passed. Not even for the defense of Greece may we anger the gods." Phaedopides felt despair wash over him. The full moon was still days away. By then, the fate of Athens might already be decided. "Is this your final word?" he asked, his voice cracking with emotion and exhaustion. "It is. Tell Athens we will march after the festival, not a moment before." With this cold comfort, Phaedopides departed, his weary body somehow finding the strength to begin the long journey back to Athens. As he left Sparta behind, he knew he carried not the promise of immediate salvation, but the burden of telling his city it must face the Persian might alone, at least for now. At the edge of the plain, the Bay of Marathon curved like a crescent moon against the northeastern coast of Attica, its waters glinting sapphire under the late summer sun. Here, the land opened into a broad plain, nearly 6 miles long and 2 miles wide at its broadest point, bordered by gentle hills to the west and marshes to the north and south. For generations, local farmers had tended this fertile ground, coaxing wheat, barley, and olives from the soil. Now, this peaceful plain was about to be transformed into the stage for one of history's pivotal confrontations. The tranquility of Marathon was shattered when the horizon darkened with sails. 600 Persian ships, their prows cutting through the clear waters of the bay, approached the shore in disciplined formation. Local shepherds and farmers stood frozen on the hillsides, watching in terrified awe as the greatest military force ever assembled in their lifetime prepared to disembark. With practiced efficiency, the Persian army came ashore. First came the advance scouts and engineers, securing the beach and establishing a perimeter. They were followed by wave after wave of infantry, tens of thousands of men from across the vast Persian Empire. Median and Persian noblemen in colorful tunics and trousers, their beards curled and oiled in court fashion. Stocky Bactrians with their distinctive headgear. Lithe, Saki archers, each carrying a composite bow of devastating power. Light infantry from a dozen subject nations, each with their native weapons and armor. Most impressive of all was the Persian cavalry, magnificent horses and skilled riders who had conquered the known world from the Indus to the Aegean. These were the elite of the great king's forces, noblemen trained from childhood in the Persian ideal of riding, archery, and speaking truth. They moved with deserved confidence as they led their mounts down the gangplanks and onto Greek soil. Overseeing this massive operation were daddies and artaferns, standing on a small rise near the shore. Beside them, like a ghost from Athens' past, stood the aged Hippias. His eyes scanned the familiar landscape of his homeland, seeing both what was before him and the memories of decades past. "There," he said, pointing toward the western edge of the plain. "The Athenians will come from that direction, along the road from the city." His finger traced the route. "They will likely position themselves near the shrine of Heracles, where the ground narrows." Daddies nodded thoughtfully. "How many fighters can they muster?" "Perhaps 10,000 hoplites, at most," Hippias replied. "Heavy infantry, well trained, but far fewer than your forces." A smile touched the Persian general's lips. "Then this will be over quickly. We shall establish our camp here, rest the men, and crush these rebellious Greeks when they appear. Then, onward to Athens itself." As the Persian camp took shape, tents rising from the plain like a sudden forest, cook fires beginning to send tendrils of smoke into the clear air, a solitary figure slipped away from the hills overlooking the bay, an Athenian scout, having witnessed the landing, now raced toward the city with the dire news. Athens erupted into frenzied activity when word arrived of the Persian landing. The assembly convened immediately, and the 10 generals, along with Callimachus, the polemarch, debated their response. Some argued for remaining within the city walls, conducting a defensive siege. Others, led by Miltiades, insisted on meeting the enemy at Marathon, preventing them from advancing closer to Athens. "If we wait behind our walls," Miltiades argued, "the Persians will have time to foment rebellion among those sympathetic to Hippias. We must confront them while our city remains united." After heated debate, the decision was made. The Athenian army would march to Marathon and take position, blocking the routes to Athens. Runners were dispatched to Plataea, a small city long allied with Athens, requesting whatever aid they could provide. As dawn broke the next day, the Athenian force assembled outside the city gates. 10,000 hoplites stood in tribal formations, each man carrying a heavy wooden shield faced with bronze, a long thrusting spear, and a short iron sword at his hip. Their bronze helmets gleamed in the early light, and the horsehair crests swayed gently in the breeze. These were not professional soldiers, but citizen farmers, craftsmen, and merchants who trained in arms as their civic duty. Callimachus moved among them, his position as polemarch marked by distinctive armor. "Today," he called out, his voice carrying across the assembled ranks, "we march not just for Athens, but for all Greeks who cherish freedom. Let every man remember that upon his shield he carries the fate of generations yet unborn." A roar of approval answered him as the army began its march, spear points catching the light of the rising sun. The rhythmic tread of thousands of sandaled feet raising dust from the road to Marathon and destiny. The fateful vote. Dusk settled over the plain of Marathon, painting the landscape in hues of purple and gold. For 4 days, the two armies had faced each other across the open ground. The massive Persian force spread along the beach, and the smaller Athenian army positioned at the narrowest part of the plain, where the foothills reached closest to the shoreline. Neither side had yet committed to full battle. In the gathering darkness, an unlikely reinforcement arrived at the Greek camp. 900 Plataeans, virtually every man of fighting age from the small allied city, had marched to stand with Athens in its hour of need. Though modest in number, their arrival lifted the spirits of the Athenian troops immeasurably. Here was proof that they did not stand entirely alone against the Persian tide. As night fully claimed the sky, scattered with stars that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires long before Persia or Greece, the Athenian generals gathered in a torchlit council. The flames cast flickering shadows across their faces as they debated the crucial question before them: whether to attack the Persian force or maintain their defensive position. The council was evenly split. 5 generals, including Miltiades, advocated for attack. 5 others urged caution, arguing that they should wait for Spartan reinforcements. "Each day we delay," warned one of the cautious generals, "is another day for Hippias to spread dissent within Athens." Even now, his sympathizers might be plotting to open our city gates to the Persians. But to attack a force so much larger than our own, countered another, without the Spartans beside us, is that not courting disaster? Back and forth, the arguments flew, each side making valid points, neither gaining advantage. The deadlock seemed unbreakable until all eyes turned to the one man who had not yet spoken, but whose vote would decide the matter: Callimachus, the polemarch. Miltiades approached him, stepping into the pool of torchlight that illuminated the center of the council. His voice, when he spoke, was low, but carried to every ear in the circle. "Callimachus, it rests with you whether Athens shall be enslaved or free. Never since the Athenians became a people were they in such danger as they are now. If they bow the knee to the Medes, they are to be given up to Hippias, and you know what they will suffer. But if Athens comes victorious out of this contest, she may become the first city in Greece." The polemarch's face remained impassive as Miltiades continued. "We generals are divided. Half of us wish to fight, half to avoid a battle. Now, if we do not fight, I look to see a great disturbance at Athens, which will shake men's resolutions, and then they will submit to the Medes. But if we fight before any unsoundness shows itself among our citizens, let the gods give fair play, and we are able to overcome. Then we may remain free." Miltiades paused, his next words hanging heavy with the weight of destiny. "All now depends upon you." A profound silence fell over the assembly. Callimachus stood motionless, the burden of Athens' fate pressing upon his shoulders. He was not just a warrior, but an artisan as well, a man who had spent much of his life crafting beauty from clay. Now he must craft the future from the uncertain materials of courage and strategy. When at last he spoke, his voice was steady and clear. "I vote for battle. Better to die on our feet than live on our knees." His eyes swept the circle of generals. "We attack tomorrow at dawn." A murmur of approval rippled through those who had advocated for battle, while the others nodded in respectful acceptance of the decision. The matter was settled. A plan quickly took shape, with Miltiades offering tactical suggestions based on his knowledge of Persian warfare. They expect us to match them evenly across the field," he explained, "but we cannot match their numbers. Instead, we must strengthen our wings and thin our center." "A thin center will break under their assault," objected one general. "It will bend," Miltiades corrected, "but not break. And while their center pushes forward, our stronger wings will envelop them from both sides." His finger traced the maneuver in the dirt. Their advantage in numbers becomes a disadvantage when they are surrounded. As the council dispersed to prepare their tribes for mourning, Callimachus lingered by the dying torchlight. He gazed up at the stars, the same stars that had guided his ancestors across the wine-dark sea to found this city generations ago. "May Athena guide our spears," he whispered to the night sky, "and may history judge that I chose wisely." The plain of destiny. Dawn broke with gentle radiance over Marathon, bathing the plain in soft golden light. In the Persian camp near the shore, morning rituals were observed with practiced precision. Soldiers performed ablutions, prayed to their gods, and broke their fast, many perhaps wondering if this would be the day the Athenian rebels finally offered battle or continued their frustrating delay. What the Persian sentries reported as the morning mists began to clear sent ripples of surprise through the camp. The Athenian army had abandoned its defensive position by the foothills and was now forming battle lines directly across the plain, clearly intent on engagement. Even more baffling to the Persian commanders was the apparent absence of cavalry on the Greek side, a deficiency that should have made any rational general hesitate to fight on open ground. "They come to us," Datis remarked with satisfaction as he observed the Greek deployment from a small rise. "Excellent. We shall oblige them with the destruction they seek." Artaphornes, his fellow commander, was more cautious. Why would they attack now, after days of waiting? And with such an unusual formation, he pointed to the Greek line, where it was becoming apparent that the wings were heavily reinforced, while the center appeared perilously thin. This is not standard Greek tactics. Hippias, standing nearby and leaning slightly on a staff, his aged eyes squinting at the distant formations, offered his assessment. "Miltiades. It must be his influence. He knows our methods too well." A note of concern had entered the old tyrant's voice. Nevertheless, the Persian army began its own deployment, confident in its overwhelming numerical advantage. At the center stood the elite Persian and Median infantry, flanked by contingents from various subject nations. Their cavalry was held in reserve, ready to exploit any breakthrough or pursue a routed enemy. Across the plain, the Greek line stretched for nearly a mile, though not in the even distribution typical of hoplite warfare. As Miltiades had planned, the tribes positioned on the wings stood 8 men deep, providing formidable strength at the flanks, while the center had been thinned to perhaps just 4 ranks. Callimachus took position on the right wing, an honored place traditionally reserved for the polemark. Miltiades commanded the tribe at the left wing. Between them stood the remaining 8 Athenian tribes and their Plataean allies, each unit led by its own general. In the tense moments before combat was joined, Miltiades walked the line, offering encouragement to the men. Many were farmers and craftsmen who had never faced battle on this scale. Fear was natural, but what he saw in their eyes went beyond fear. There was determination, pride, and the steely resolve of men fighting for their homes and families. "Remember," he called out as he passed each tribal unit, "they fight because they must. We fight because we choose to. That makes all the difference." When he reached his position on the left wing, Miltiades gave the signal that would echo through history. The Greek line began to advance toward the Persian army, first at a measured walk that soon quickened to a trot. The unusual speed of their approach, hoplites typically maintained formation at a steady pace, caught the Persian commanders by surprise. What happened next astonished even more. When the Greeks came within arrow range of the Persian line, instead of slowing as expected, they broke into a full run, their heavy armor and shields clattering, spear points gleaming in the morning light. It was unprecedented. Conventional wisdom held that hoplites should preserve their energy and cohesion for the moment of impact. The Persian archers loosed their first volleys, arrows arcing into the sky before raining down upon the advancing Greeks. Some found their mark, men falling amid the thundering charge. But the rapid advance had shortened the time under fire, and soon the distance closed beyond effective archery range. The sound when the armies collided was likened by those who survived to a thunderclap, bronze against wicker, spear against shield, the collective roar of thousands of voices raised in battle cries, or cut short in death. The plain of Marathon, so peaceful for generations, now trembled under the violence of nations in collision. In the center, as Miltiades had predicted, the thin Greek line bent under the pressure of the Persian elite forces pushing forward. Men fought and died in the crush, the disciplined formation threatening to rupture entirely. But the Greeks in the center had been prepared for this development. They yielded ground in good order, bending but not breaking, drawing the Persian center deeper into what was slowly becoming a trap. Meanwhile, on both wings, the heavily reinforced Greek formations began to gain the advantage. The superior armor, longer spears, and rigid discipline of the hoplite phalanx proved devastating against the lighter armed Persian flanks. Gradually, the Greek wings began to drive their opponents back toward the beach, creating the outlines of a massive pincer movement. For the common soldier in the heart of battle, the grand strategy was invisible. There was only the immediate struggle for survival, the desperate focus on the enemy before him. Shields clashed against shields, men stumbled on the bodies of the fallen. The ground grew slick with blood. The ordered formations dissolved into a chaotic melee, where individual courage and skill often made the difference between life and death. As the morning wore on, the Persian center, having pushed deep into the Greek line, suddenly found itself in a precarious position. Their initial advantage had become a deadly vulnerability. The Greek wings, having routed their opponents, now wheeled inward, threatening to surround the Persian elite, who had advanced too far in pursuit of what they thought was victory. Panic began to spread through the Persian ranks as they realized their predicament. What had seemed a certain triumph was transforming before their eyes into potential disaster. The order to withdraw came too late for many. The closing trap of Greek spears offered no escape. The retreat quickly became a rout. Persian soldiers fled toward the safety of their ships, pursued relentlessly by Greeks who only hours before might have seemed outmatched. The marshes claimed many who sought alternate escape routes, their heavy equipment dragging them down into the mire. At the shore, desperate scenes unfolded as thousands tried to board too few ships. Some vessels were swamped by the weight of panicked soldiers crowding aboard. Others were seized by Greeks who waded into the shallows, dragging Persian noblemen back to shore to face Greek blades. By midday, it was over. The plain of Marathon, scene of one of history's most improbable victories, fell silent except for the groans of the wounded and the prayers of thanksgiving from the survivors. The road to Athens. As the last Persian ships vanished over the horizon, the magnitude of what had occurred began to sink in among the victorious Greeks. Against overwhelming odds, they had prevailed. The invaders had been driven back into the sea from which they came. Yet amid the triumph, there was no time for extended celebration. An urgent danger still loomed. Miltiades, blood-spattered but clear-eyed, gathered his fellow generals in hasty council. "They are not sailing home," he declared, pointing to the departing Persian fleet. "They sail around Sunium toward Athens. The city lies undefended save for old men and boys. We must return before the Persians can land and take what we have just preserved." The realization struck the assembled leaders like a physical blow. The Persian strategy was clear now. Having failed at Marathon, they would attempt to reach the undefended city before its army could return. If they succeeded, Athens would fall, and the victory at Marathon would prove hollow indeed. Orders rang out across the battlefield. The dead would be honored later. Now, incredibly, these men who had just fought for their lives must undertake a forced march of nearly 26 miles back to Athens, still wearing their armor, many nursing wounds, all exhausted from battle. Yet they went. With discipline that would later become legendary, the victorious army formed columns and began the long journey home. They left behind only a small detachment to guard the Persian dead and the considerable spoils of victory. The march became a race against time and human endurance. The same legs that had run across the plain of Marathon now pounded the dusty road to Athens. The same arms that had wielded spears in desperate combat now carried shields and equipment along mountain paths and through valleys. The summer sun beat down mercilessly, and the weight of bronze armor became nearly unbearable as the miles stretched on. Some fell by the wayside, overcome by exhaustion or wounds that had seemed minor in the flush of victory, but now demanded their due. Others helped weaker comrades, sharing water, offering shoulders to lean on, refusing to leave anyone behind who could still move. Meanwhile, in Athens, fear gripped the populace. Days earlier, they had watched their fathers, husbands, and sons march away to face the Persian might. Now, lookouts reported enemy ships approaching the coast near Phaleron, the port of Athens. With the city's defenders absent, despair threatened to overcome resistance. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the plain south of the city, those watching from the walls witnessed an astonishing sight. From the direction of Marathon came a cloud of dust, and then, emerging from it, the vanguard of the Athenian army, moving at a pace that seemed impossible for men who had already fought a battle that day. The Persian fleet, observing from offshore the unexpected return of the Greek army, hesitated. Their scouts confirmed the worst. The defenders of Marathon had somehow reached Athens before them. The opportunity for an unopposed landing had vanished. After a brief delay, during which the Persian commanders likely debated their options, the fleet turned away. The invasion was over, at least for now. Athens stood intact, saved by the extraordinary endurance and determination of its citizen soldiers. As night fell over the city, the defenders who had raced from Marathon finally allowed themselves to rest. Many collapsed where they stood, too exhausted even to remove their armor. Others found loved ones in tearful reunions, the joy of survival mixing with pride in what they had accomplished. In later years, many stories would circulate about that remarkable day. One told of Phaedopides, who after delivering his message to Sparta and fighting at Marathon, volunteered to run ahead of the army to Athens with news of the victory. According to this tale, he reached the city, gasped out, "We have won," and then died from the exertion of his journey. Whether this account is history or legend, it captures something essential about the spirit of those who fought at Marathon, the willingness to give everything, even life itself, in service to their city and the idea of freedom it represented. The honored dead. When dawn broke the day after the battle, revealing a field strewn with the aftermath of combat, the Athenians took an unprecedented step. Rather than returning their fallen comrades to the city for individual burial, as was customary, they decided to honor them where they had fallen, in the center of the plain of Marathon. Slaves and soldiers worked side by side to create a great mound of earth, a lasting monument to the 192 Athenian citizens who had given their lives for freedom. This burial mound, the Sorrows as it came to be known, rose from the battlefield like a sentinel, visible from far across the plain. Unlike the Persian dead, who were hastily interred in common graves, the Athenian fallen received funeral rites befitting heroes. Their names were inscribed on 10 marble steels, one for each tribe, placed atop the mound where they would stand for generations to come. As the last earth was patted into place and the libations were poured for the dead, Callimachus, the polemarch, was notably absent from the ceremonies. He who had cast the deciding vote for battle, who had led the right wing with distinction, lay among those being honored. The war archon had fallen in the moment of victory, his life exchanged for Athens' freedom. A separate mound was raised for the fallen Plataeans, smaller but no less reverent recognition of the loyalty shown by Athens' only ally on that momentous day. And for the Persian dead, estimated at nearly 6,400, mass graves received bodies stripped of valuables, but afforded the minimal dignities demanded by the universal laws of warfare. In Athens itself, the magnitude of what had been accomplished gradually became clear. A force of perhaps 10,000 Greeks had defeated a Persian army more than twice their size. The myth of Persian invincibility, which had led so many other Greek cities to offer earth and water in submission, was shattered. Something profound had shifted in the relationship between East and West, between empire and freedom. In the days that followed, the Spartan force finally arrived, having marched as promised after the conclusion of their religious festival. They requested to be taken to Marathon to view the battlefield. There, among the burial mounds and scattered debris of war, the professional warriors of Greece studied with grudging admiration what their amateur counterparts had achieved. "Tell us of the battle," a Spartan commander asked Miltiades, who had led them to the site. The Athenian general gestured broadly across the plain. "What you see before you is a victory, not of a few over many, or of the strong over the weak, but of free men over those who are not." The Spartans nodded in understanding. They, of all Greeks, appreciated the martial significance of what had occurred, even as they regretted their absence from it. In the assembly at Athens, debates began about how to prepare for the future. Few believed that Persia would accept this defeat as final. Darius would surely send another, larger force to punish the defiant city. Themistocles, a rising political figure who had fought at Marathon, advocated for strengthening the Athenian navy, arguing that Greece's future security lay in commanding the sea. "The Persians will return," he warned. "When they do, we must be ready not just on land, but on the waters that surround us." His foresight would prove crucial in the years to come, as Athens transformed itself from a primarily land power to the preeminent naval force in the Mediterranean. For now, though, the city savored its deliverance. In accordance with the vision reported by Phaedopides, a shrine to Pan was established in a cave on the Acropolis, where sacrifices would be offered annually in remembrance of the god's promised aid. The battle trophies, Persian weapons, armor, and vessels captured on the field were dedicated in the temples, tangible evidence of divine favor. In homes throughout Attica, families gathered around hearths to share tales of individual heroism. The runner who had carried news of victory to the city, the hoplite who had seized a Persian ship with his bare hands, only to have them severed by an enemy axe, then grasping the vessel with his teeth until he died rather than relinquish his prize. The brothers who had fought side by side until one fell, the survivor carrying both shields for the remainder of the battle. Such stories, embellished with each telling, became part of Athenian identity reminders that ordinary citizens, when united in purpose, could achieve extraordinary things. Marathon was not just a military victory. It was a vindication of the democratic experiment itself, proof that free men fighting for their own land and laws could defeat the subjects of even the mightiest despot. Echoes across time. 10 years after the dust settled on Marathon's plain, when Darius's son Xerxes led an even mightier host against Greece, the memory of that first victory steeled Greek resolve. At Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea, the lessons learned at Marathon would help preserve Greek independence against seemingly impossible odds. But the significance of Marathon extended far beyond the immediate aftermath. In Athens, the battle became a defining moment in the city's self-conception, proof of what its democratic system could achieve. Veterans of Marathon enjoyed special status, their opinions carrying particular weight in the assembly. When speakers wished to invoke the city's finest hour, they needed only to say, "The men who stood at Marathon," and all understood the reference. The playwright Aeschylus, who fought in the battle himself, considered this service his greatest achievement. Though he wrote tragedies that would be celebrated for centuries, his self-composed epitaph mentioned only his participation at Marathon, not his literary accomplishments. As decades passed into centuries, the story of Marathon continued to resonate. The burial mound remained, a silent witness on the plain. Travelers would detour to visit it, touching the soil that covered Athens' heroes. The Greek biographer Plutarch, writing nearly 600 years later, claimed that on certain nights, ghostly sounds of battle could still be heard across the fields, the clash of weapons, the cries of men, the thunder of thousands of feet charging across the plain. In the modern world, the legacy of Marathon found new expression. When the Olympic Games were revived in 1896, the marathon race was created specifically to commemorate Vedipide's legendary run. The distance, approximately 26 miles, traced the route from the battlefield to Athens, a journey that had saved a city and passed into legend. Today, more than 2,500 years after the clash of arms at Marathon, that singular day continues to capture the imagination. The battle represents more than a military engagement. It symbolizes the power of determination against overwhelming odds, the value of strategic innovation, and the strength that comes when citizens fight not as subjects, but as stakeholders in their own freedom. Perhaps most significantly, Marathon stands as a reminder that history's course can turn on a single day, a single decision, a single vote. Had Callimachus chosen differently in that torchlit council, had Miltiades' strategy failed, had the Athenian center broken rather than held, the narrative of Western civilization might have unfolded along a drastically different path. The plain itself has changed little over the millennia. The burial mound still rises from the earth, though the marble steels are long gone. Modern Marathon is a small town where local farmers tend the same fertile soil their ancestors worked. Tourists come to stand where history pivoted, trying to imagine the clash of bronze against wicker, the shouts of men fighting for everything they held dear. They come because Marathon speaks to something eternal in the human spirit, the belief that courage can overcome fear, that the few can stand against the many, that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things when united by a just cause. In a world still struggling with questions of freedom and tyranny, democracy and authoritarianism, the events that transpired on that plain in 490 before the Common Era maintain their power to inspire. The thunder of 10,000 pairs of feet running against all military convention into the teeth of an empire continues to echo across time. And if we listen carefully, across the vast distance of centuries, we might still hear what the Athenians heard as they crossed that fateful field, not just the battle cries of their comrades or the clash of arms, but the first notes of a song that celebrates the enduring human yearning for freedom, a melody that began at Marathon and plays on to this day.